Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of interviews with spiritually awakening people. I've passed the 400 mark in terms of the number of ones done, and if this is new to you and you'd like to watch other ones, go to batgap.com where you'll see all the previous ones archived in various ways. This program is made possible by the support of appreciative listeners and viewers, so if you appreciate it and you feel like supporting it, there's a donate button on every page of the site. My guest today is Pernilla Lillerose, which she tells me was not her birth name, but she had kind of adopted it at a certain point, and I think it's a very poetic and beautiful name. In Sanskrit, they always say that there's a correlation between name and form, that the name for an apple, for instance, the vibratory quality of the sound for apple is the same vibratory quality as an apple itself. So maybe that is true of your name as well.
I've never thought of that.
Yeah. Pernilla, you sent me a little bio with some of the more significant steps in your journey. And it looks like the first one was connecting with Joel Goldsmith's teachings in 1987. And I've heard of Joel. A friend of mine has, spoken highly of him, and I think I've even listened to some recordings. But how did you stumble onto him, and why was that significant?
Oh, that's an interesting entry into this. Yeah, that was one of those things that I could not have made up, or created. It was... it's a long time ago. I had been in New Zealand in 1987, I believe it was, and I've been doing something called WWOOF, WWOOF, which stands for Working Weekends on Organic Farms, because I was studying agriculture in Denmark at that time.
Okay.
So I took a year off, and I was woofing. That means I was working on different organic and biodynamic farms. Mm-hmm. And I was spending, I think, 2 weeks with one man. His name was Clive. He was an older man, and he was doing these bizarre experiments, making annual plants, making them perennial. He was using the sun and homeopathic remedies. He was just kind of an alchemist of some type. And we had a good connection. I was playing around with him with these plants. And at that time, since I still was at the university in Denmark studying agriculture, he suggested I took some of the seeds back and did some research in the lab, just for an experiment. So I did. And but that kind of fizzled out. There wasn't a whole lot that I found out and learned. But I decided instead of continuing with agriculture, I wanted to work with people more. I was considering becoming a nurse or something, nurse aide. So I wrote to him. I always want to say email. In those days, there was no email. So I wrote to him and said, I'm not coming back, because he wanted me to come back. I'm planning on staying here. So that was kind of the end. And then I got a letter from another woofer who was with him. And he wrote something like, I've talked to Clive about you, and I've been meditating, and it's very important. I have to laugh what I'm going to say now, because it sounded so out there. It's very important that you come back to New Zealand to help raise the Christ consciousness. And I was like, really? And who are you to tell me,
Yeah.
So I wrote a letter back, which may not have been so nice. I kind of said, like, who are you? And whatever I wrote, it's so long ago. And I got a letter back saying, boy, you have a lot of fire under the roof. I think he was right. And he says, but, I have been meditating on it, and it's important that you come. And I would suggest you read this book called Practicing the Presence by Joel Goldsmith. So this whole event was so bizarre, right? It came out of nowhere. So I went to the library in Denmark and looked for this book. They didn't have it. I put a note in if they could find it for me. And I think a few months later, I got a note from the library that they found the book in Norway. That's a different country.
Sure.
And I could come and pick it up. So this was a big deal, So I picked it up, started reading it. It did nothing for me. But because it's been such a big ordeal, I thought, I'm going to make a Xerox copy of this book for later, maybe. So I did, returned the book, put the Xerox copy in my bookshelf, and forgot all about it. Till maybe 6 or 12 months later, something in me went and picked up this book. And I started reading it. And I started meditating, like Joel said, and I could not get enough. It was one of those things like soul food you've been starving for your whole life. So I started meditating, and I think it was only a few weeks into it. You know, that's when I had that big experience that I don't know if I wrote about it, but it was.
Well, you should tell us about it.
Yeah, probably. So I was sitting meditating and doing what Joel said. He said, you know, go inside and say, I and my Father are one. So I did, and that's a Bible quote. Joel, he was a Christian mystic, and
Goldsmith sounds Jewish.
Yes, he was Jewish.
Oh, okay.
And he used to be a reader at the Christian Science Church, and then he left that and started his own movement called the Infinite Way. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I sat down and I meditated, and I did it every day. And then one day it was just like, you know, it felt like the heavens opened up, and this unbelievable love. And it was just so profound, you know, I was just completely flooded with love, and just thinking about it. And I just got down on my knees, and I was just like, please do not ever let me go away lead me astray again. Let me always stay with this. And it was one of those openings that lasted for several months, and I walked around in love, as love. There was basically just love, and I couldn't do anything but just accept. I remember I was even kind of holding myself, the little Pernilla, I was just holding her. It was just love, love, love. It was so beautiful. And then it all changed, as these things often do, right?
Yeah.
So in those days, I was dancing. I was doing this dance every week. And after my dance class, I would go down to the cafe right underneath and have a cappuccino and read one of Joel's books. I was just so, pulled in. And I was just sitting there and just looking around and just seeing God, love everywhere. And then this man came up. This is still in Denmark, right? Uh-huh. So this man comes up for me, a black man from California. He comes up and asks me for directions, in English, of course. So I told him, and then he comes back later and says, can I sit and join you here? I said, sure. So I kind of put the book under the table. I didn't want to announce my God thing. I think it was called God Consciousness. And so he sat down with his wine, and he says, so what are you reading? Good luck. So I showed him, and then we started talking about God, basically. And he knew the Bible inside out, upside down, back to front. So we were talking. It was kind of an interesting conversation. And then at a certain point, I said, I want to go home now. And he says, I don't have a place to stay. Can I stay at your place tonight? And inside of me, there was a big no. Right. I didn't know the guy from squat, right? So I said, no, I don't feel comfortable with that. And that's when everything started turning for me. Then he said, well, it's not your house, it's God's house. And I knew that was true in my state. There was, and he started coming with things like, from maybe biblical things or something that were just twisted enough to make it in his favor. Right. And I was just not in a space to discern. I was too open and too, maybe too innocent in that space. And I really didn't have discernment. So eventually I said, well, okay then. So he took, I think, the bus back. I took my bike back. And then I entered into the 5 worst months of hell of my life.
Yeah.
And
because you couldn't get rid of this guy, right?
I couldn't get rid of it. And, looking back, it wasn't my fault, but it was because of my lack of discernment that I mean, I was not blaming myself, but I was just confused. And I was in such deep surrender to the divine that, you know, everything that came, I couldn't quite think, you know, I couldn't discern. And his name was Yul, Y-U-L, which was so close to Joel. You know, there were just things that were confusing in my state. And then one day, or one evening, or maybe the first or second evening, he says, God has sent me to straighten you out, or something like that. And I still had a lot of insecurity and, you know, the things that we all carry with us. So I really believed that, you know, I knew I wasn't pure inside. I had my old stuff. So there was a part of me that believed that. So you can see it was just so confusing, so confusing. And I thought, okay, anyway, it was absolute hell for 5 months.
Yeah.
And during that time, I was just in surrender, and I said, thy will be done, thy will be done, thy will be done. I just wanted to surrender. I knew, for some reason, I knew there was something right about what happened, about him being there. There was something right about it, and I couldn't understand it, but I just knew that. So it wasn't right just to kick him out, which I couldn't really anyway. He was a big guy, and I was
couldn't you call the police and say, hey, this guy's in my house?
Like, no, because I let him in. You see,
you want him out. It's your house, right? So you couldn't you tell the police, I want this guy out of here?
But I wasn't in that state, Rick. I was in a very confused state where I wanted to surrender to God. I kind of felt that there was something going on here that was part of my opening. And so I cut off my connection with most of my friends. He allowed me to stay connected with one friend who had just become a born-again Christian. And I could connect with my mom. And that was about it.
So when you say he allowed you, did it turn into a controlling kind of situation?
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty bad. And looking back, it's like, oh, sweetheart, how could that ever happen?
Yeah.
But it was because I just, I grew up with a father who was an angry man, controlling. So there was that part inside, I call it the collapse. I've written about that quite a bit too. There was something in me that collapsed inside. I couldn't just stand up in my truth because it wasn't embodied. I mean, the experience was not embodied. It was just this openness. Yeah.
What finally got him out of there?
I got in touch with finally he let me go to a Christian Science church, and I talked to one of the practitioners. I think little by little I got my bearings back and started seeing that something is just not right here, But it took a while to just come all the way back, and it's like, what is going on here? So she said to me, this is not good. So she worked with me, and then I called. Then I found the phone number for the publisher of Joel Goldsmith's books called Divorce. I called them from Denmark and asked if there were any people who knew or who worked like Joel. And they gave me the name of a woman called Barbara Mall, who used to be a student of Joel's and who was teaching. So I wrote her a letter, and she wrote me a letter back. She says, get him out of the house, Yeah. So little by little, I got that,
started to grow a backbone.
Exactly, yeah. And then after a few months, I got him out. Or while he was gone, I had somebody come and change the locks so he could come back in. And so little by little, I got my spine back. And then I went to America in 1988, I believe, 87 or 88.
Before we jump ahead to that, I think there's a general principle here that would be worth discussing for a moment, because I can almost hear people saying, well, that was pretty stupid and naive, I would never do a thing like that. But look at how many people sort of come under the control of dominant cult leaders and spiritual leaders and so on, and suspend their judgment and their discrimination and end up giving them all their money or their bodies, or doing all kinds of crazy stuff, because they get into this go with the flow mode, well, it's all divine and I should just let this play out. So I think there's really an important lesson to be learned in terms of finding the balance between surrender and self-determination. There's a kind of a balance point between those two qualities. God helps those who help themselves, but that implies a certain, proactiveness.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more that I'm not the only one who's gone through a situation like that.
Thousands have.
Yeah. And because I went through it myself, I know what it was in me that made me do that. Mm-hmm. The first sign was in this cafe, when I felt this no, I didn't trust it. Right. I didn't go with that. And that was kind of, when I look back, years later, when I started understanding more what happened, it was that initial no that my heart or my body just said no. And I didn't know how to trust that. And I think that has become a very big part of my life, of the work I do, of my message, to specifically help women. But I work with men too, but specifically for women, that we have not really lived in a society or in a world where we were encouraged to trust our heart and to trust our wisdom. And it's a process. It was a long process for me to get to trust that, because, now it's much easier, but out in the world still, I would say, it's not really supported. If I say to you, I know I'm not going because I can't feel it, which is how I function today. Somebody may go like, well, what is that supposed to mean? Are you crazy? There's not that normal feedback or understanding that this is how I function. So I think we have a lot to learn in the world. We have a lot to learn about ourselves in this world where it's not accepted to live from that inner knowing and that inner wisdom. Yeah. And I think it's immensely important to be surrounded by people who understand that, so we feel stronger in taking back our divine power.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And the various scriptures, I don't know about Christianity or whatnot, but I know that in the Vedic literature, it really encourages you to keep the company of the wise and keep the company of the holy, and so on. That's considered, and they might even use the analogy, or I'll make it up at the moment if they don't, that you're like a little delicate shoot or plant, and you need a kind of a protective environment at that stage, and these subtle impulses these impulses within are subtle. At least, especially at the outset, and the world is gross. The world is like in your face, and it's so easy for them to get squashed.
Yeah. I think, isn't that also from the Bible, when the Christ was born, they took him away, right? They took him away until he was bigger and stronger. Yeah. There is something like, when that first opening happens, you're just like a little, very, very vulnerable little sprout, and it's very easy to get squashed. I speak from experience,
Yeah.
And I think it's easier today than it was back then. I mean, this is 30 years ago?
Sure. I mean, this whole thing this kind of stuff that we're into is becoming more widespread.
Yeah. And when I was in Denmark, I didn't know anybody. I could go to the Christian Science Church, but that was about it. People didn't know about awakening or these experiences. It made no sense. So it was hard to find somebody to go to and get some help.
I know when I first learned to meditate back in the 60s, I was, all my friends were taking drugs, and so I learned to meditate, and with a very short amount of time, I realized I can't hang around with these people anymore. But I hadn't gained new friends, and so for quite a few months, I just hung out with the dog and walked to the beach every day with my dog, and went to school, and started doing things on my own, and then naturally, gradually, I picked up a whole new circle of friends. But if I had tried to hold on to those friends in those circumstances, I probably would have fallen away from meditation, gone back into those habits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think we're discussing this because it's a valuable general principle, I think, which is that there's some importance to the company you keep. And if people are finding it really hard to get onto a spiritual path or stick to it or anything like that, they might want to look at who they surround themselves with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Not to sound preachy, but it's a practical consideration.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do too with the whole neural pathways, the brain wiring. Mm-hmm. It's the same. If it's not strong enough inside, we fall back on the default wiring, which is usually not in our favor. I mean, it's not an awakening wiring, we can say. So it is important to keep to keep repeating and repeating and repeating, so that sprout or that neural wiring gets stronger. And eventually, that's why eventually I found my spine again, so I could stand up straight without falling over if somebody disagreed with me. And I think there is a process to this whole embodiment. I'm very much about embodiment. There's a big part of it that we bring that into our living experience in life, that we live it. It's not just something we bypass the life. It's very much about bringing it in, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
And on that note, I don't know about you, but I know people who've been meditating for decades who are still trying to kind of play fiddler crab in the shell. It's like, oh, I couldn't possibly watch the news, or I couldn't possibly go to this restaurant, or do something so gross as to go to a concert. I mean, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but there are some people who are so in a state of such delicacy that they continually try to shelter themselves, and there I think there's some, I'll let you elaborate on this, but there's some need for getting out there and integrating more, and being able to sort of do normal things and not be so impressionable. Yeah,
I think there's different ways of looking at that. I mean, I'm very much a hermit in one way. I just love being on my own with my cats in the woods, where I live. And I'm also out there a lot. I have to find a good balance between the two.
Yeah.
I think in the beginning it is important to just shut out everything and just be with all that stuff, that normally drives you out and away from yourself, and, to get experiences, to not feel lonely, to be loved, liked, to find safety, whatever it is. I think there is a very important phase to learn to sit with all that energy that usually drives you out. Mm-hmm. I think it's very valid. And then that there is a point where there might be more of a naturalness to come out, because you get more in touch with who you truly are. And if it's not coming, if you're trying to live in a shell because you're afraid of the world,
right,
then there is obviously some fear that needs to be met. That's quite obvious. And it's easy to do the spiritual bypass. I think a lot of people have done that. That's certainly not my way, not my path, or not the way I work with people. I think being able to bring all the feelings, all the fears, all the things we are afraid of, ashamed of, can we bring those in and learn how to be present with that? And that is, again, it's a skill. I'm trained as a Hakomi practitioner, and Hakomi is body-centered therapy. So it's really very much about coming into the body and learning to listen to the body. And when I look in the world, and when I go to, retreats and different things, I notice how difficult it is for people to actually be present in their bodies and learning to listen to their body from the body, not from the mind. Right. Think, oh, I think it is this, or it's like, no, what is the body actually saying? Because that's where we enter into the body, and that's where real transformation can happen, so that who we are becomes embodied and not just something that's out there and we need to shield from the rest. So yeah, I think you're right. That probably happens a lot. I think there's a place for that. But if it's a hiding from meeting something in yourself, well, you just won't get embodied. I'm sure it's all good in the big picture, but you won't get the benefits of actually starting to feel, to live the presence and the love and the oneness in your life.
Mm-hmm. Since you mentioned the word shame, I think I'll ask you a question now that someone sent in, Raymond from Washington. He read some of your website, and we've rewritten the question slightly to hopefully make it more clear. Hopefully we haven't misinterpreted what he was asking. But he asks about people feeling shame having an evolutionary purpose in humanity, to make people introspect about their actions, particularly when the actions impact others negatively. What do you think about that?
I just wrote 4 articles actually about shame, because I encountered some shame in myself a few months ago about just being myself, basically. It was just a real deep layer. I just keep going deeper and opening, and you just see these things. So for me, shame, I don't know. I have never thought of that. I don't think I can answer that if it's for the evolutionary process.
You just wrote 4 articles about it. What were they about?
Well, it's about the way I see it, and there is this quote from my book there where I talk about that we live basically in resistance to who we are because we believe that the part of us that we resist, we believe that that's who we are. Mm-hmm. And so as long as we still have parts of ourselves that we want to hide, that we're ashamed of, embarrassed of, it's because there is a belief that we are that. And that's where there's duality. When you wake up, in my experience, I bring everything in. I'm also a self-love mentor, and I can't disown any part of myself. I can't exclude anything about myself because then I live in duality. And my movement is to live in oneness with myself. And when I live in oneness with myself, then of course I experience it in the outside too. So when I found this place in me that I felt ashamed just to be me, to be Pernilla. I mean, it makes no sense to the mind. So I really had to go and be with that. And then I could see that there was a part of me that felt ashamed to even share that I was ashamed to be myself, but the beautiful thing, Rick, was that I learned so much about shame, and I can see that shame builds on itself, and it keeps, that shell you talked about, it keeps us kind of separate from the love and the oneness that's everywhere. So I think it's really important to meet the shame, whether it's for the evolutionary process. I have no idea. Those things, I don't quite know how to answer questions like that. I can only answer it from the experience from the inside out. And what it meant to me was like when I'm able to share, like I'm ashamed of being myself, even here on your show, that there was a piece of me that wanted to hide that. It's like, no, because that's about as unloving I can be to myself, to push this part of myself away, and that's not really the path I'm on. Mm-hmm. So I started writing a few articles about it, and it was actually very liberating and very sweet to see that. And the funny thing is when things unfold in myself, I just start seeing it around me more clearly, that, oh yeah, that's because we're actually all ashamed of being who we are. No, we're ashamed of being who we think we are. That's, I think, what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Because when you really know who you are,
you're not who you think you were.
Exactly.
Right.
And what is there to be ashamed of? Okay, so there's areas that have been traumatized in the past, that are not fully on board in the oneness. I don't need to be ashamed of those. I need to love them, So then it's really bringing every part into the fold. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer for that question, but that's...
Hopefully so. And if he'd like to ask a follow-up question, he can post that. Okay, so you were about to say that you went to the U.S., you were studying Joel Goldsmith, and then you came to the U.S., and then I kind of cut you off to ask you to another question, and you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so then I came to be with this student who had been a student of Goldsmith, and she was a teacher herself. So I was with her for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. I basically moved in on her ranch, which is a little north of LA, East LA, no, a little north of LA, I think. And I was, I was working for her. I was her bookkeeper. I was cleaning the house, just anything, just to start,
Right.
Came to a new country. So I was with her teachings for a couple of years. And lo and behold, I felt moved to move on and became a massage therapist. So one day I told her, I'm going to move on. I'm going to start working for you, but take your time to find a replacement. I'm not in a rush. So I waited several months, and I say, so, and it was so interesting. I've had a number of these things in my life where she says, well, this is something about, this is your ego. You're not doing God's will, all that. It's like, and here I got another opportunity, self-doubt. Am I doing the wrong thing? Right. Yeah. And so I did some therapy, and for me, it's been a slow process. I keep getting these opportunities from the divine to just grow deeper and release, any more prisoners of doubt or fear in myself. And so here was another one. And it took me again a while to feel like, okay, God is not going to punish you. Even with that awakening and all that, there was still that in there. And so I moved on, and then I've been with many wonderful other teachers over my lifetime. There's a lot of help and love out there.
Yeah, you mentioned Barry Long. He was in Australia, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And there's some controversy around him, but I don't remember what it was. But anyway, what was your experience with Barry Long?
It was great. It was very much about supporting the woman to be a woman, and teaching the men how to actually treat a woman with respect, and not seeing her as a sexual object, and respecting what she felt and said, and and not projecting all the stuff onto her. So it was very, very important for me to be with him, and I even became the U.S. coordinator for his work for 7 years or something. So I got pretty involved, and it was very, very helpful. Yeah.
What would you say were your main takeaways from the whole Barry Long thing? What main benefits you derived from it?
Well, he also he always would take us in a meditation. He says, "Okay, now let's go into me, me being
the self."
Right. So we did a lot of that. And when I was in Australia, I remember I started getting memories from my past as a child, where I would suddenly have a shift in consciousness. This is when I was, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Suddenly things would shift, and I was just the observer. And it would happen once in a while, and I didn't understand it. It was like, suddenly I was just observing what was going on around me. And then it would go back to Pranila. And that started happening more there. But now I understood what it was. It felt like the pieces started coming together. And so that was one thing. I started realizing more of, who I am, that this is actually who I am. And really feeling more and more woman, honoring myself as a woman, and trusting myself, and the female qualities in me.
Yeah. It's interesting, a lot of people, well, some people anyway, if they were listening to this, they might say, there's so much about the person and the personality and yada yada, but, Ramana said, or so-and-so, that, that's all an illusion, and we're just sort of, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic or something, or indulging in something that's not ultimately real, and we should just cut to the quick, go straight to the source, realize our true nature, and all this other stuff will kind of work itself out. But then there's a whole nother stream of spiritual enterprise which feels that you can't, that, like you said, spiritual bypassing. If you just brush this stuff off as illusory or as superficial or as of secondary importance, it's going to come back to bite you, and it really actually needs to be dealt with. So, what would you advise in terms of a balance between those two perspectives?
Yeah, it's a very non-dual question, really, isn't it? Even though I've been with many non-dual teachers, it's never been my thing to say, it doesn't really exist, or whatever. However they say that, it's just never been, it's never given me any juice, For me, it's all about embodiment. And I think I also had to come to terms with the fact that I was not like everybody in those communities. I'm just, you know what, Rick? I'm just being myself.
That's great.
And I don't know what that means. Maybe I'm completely asleep at the wheel. Maybe I'm completely awake. I don't think, it's not something I think about. I'm just being myself. I'm just allowing the unfolding to unfold. I'm receiving the downloads a lot. Like when I write, it just comes. And I know who I am in all of that. There's just this presence that I am. I never feel separate from that. And I can see that in that there's still some past conditionings, maybe some universal conditionings that are playing themselves out, and some of them I can still, my presence, my consciousness can still get pulled in sometimes and believe it. But I can always come back here. So for me, it's not right to say, oh, that all that stuff doesn't matter. It feels, it's just not my truth. But there is something, and this is, I think this is part of how my unfolding has happened, where there is a place where I really allow every part that has been left outside the fold to come back in and love it back in. And when that happens, there's a melting of what was not loved before. There's a separation, and it can come back in, and then there's a flow of oneness, there's a flow of, there's peace, and then it's easier to rest in it when there's not all these parts, knocking on your door, wanting in, and saying, no, you can't come in, no, you certainly can't come in, oh, I'm ashamed of you, stay out, or you don't even exist, what do you want, So that has never worked for me. However, there is a place where it feels like when these parts have been integrated enough in me, when then there might be some thoughts coming knocking at the door wanting to tempt me to go back out, there is a point where I'm like, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm done with you. It just feels that it has completed itself. It feels like the truth of it has embodied itself. There's no duality. And I'm just done. So again, it's just a natural unfolding of, okay, I don't even want to start loving that part. It's like, no, we're done. So there is actually a separation, how I see it too, between the thought that comes in with some negativity about myself or the world or some belief, whatever, and then the impact that has on my emotional body. So I always include the emotional body and help that come into oneness, into peace, into the love. And once it is included and incorporated and integrated, that's when this thought knocking on the door, it has no power, it has no bearing anymore. There's nothing biting it back or wanting to engage. But as long as I leave these parts out, then I will go out there and believe it all the time. I don't know if it makes sense the way I say it, but it's been, I think a lot of people have asked me that question, when do you love it and when do you leave it? And there is a flow to it. And then maybe the next layer comes up, and maybe that needs to be loved and met and listened to. And, when you listen to your body, like if I'd listened to that no back when, right? I would have saved myself a lot of suffering, right? Yeah. So learning to listen to that, then if something comes knocking on the door, says, Pernille, you can't trust yourself. I was like, please, come on, that's over. So it's more integrating it. And for me, it's not about what I don't remember the question because I can't really relate to those questions, but no.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that there's a balance that you've learned to live with, in which, if you were to try to push away and exclude this kind of stuff, then you would only make it stronger. On the other hand, at the other extreme, and so you just relax, and by relaxing and accepting it, you automatically circumvent an inner battle which might otherwise take place. But a lot of stuff ends up getting resolved and rectified. But at a certain point, there can be, in contradiction to the sort of whatever goes principle, there can be a sort of a no, I'm done with you. We don't need to deal with this anymore. Goodbye, kind of thing. So I'm just reinterpreting what I just heard you say. So there's a kind of a balance that you've learned to establish, and it seems to help you to, progress and work through and resolve this stuff once and for all.
I think also when you say, it's kind of like a resisting, like, no. There's an energy of resistance.
It creates a strain.
Yes. And that's not here. When you're done, when it's integrated, it's like, there's no resistance. Yeah. It's just like, whatever, you can move through, whatever, it's all one. But there's not that sense of the duality. There's just, I think, just the energy of the latching on or the grasping onto something is gone.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so you in the list in the bio you sent me there, you listed a number of your primary influences, and so far we've covered Joel Goldsmith and Barry Long. And then you mentioned ayahuasca. Did you go to Peru and to do ayahuasca?
No, no, I did it here in California. There was a shaman who came and did it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was another big. Oh, that was actually another big turning point in my life. Mm-hmm. There was, I don't know, maybe the 5th or 6th journey I was in. I just experienced myself.
5th or 6th ayahuasca journey, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I experienced myself just beating myself up emotionally, you know, like judging myself and hating myself and just this old conditioning. And because when you're in that space in journey space, there's you're much more the observer. So there's that gap that happens, and I could just watch myself how I did it. It was excruciatingly painful, and I felt it in a way I had never felt it before, and I just like, oh my God, and I cried and I cried and I cried because it was so horrendous that I was treating myself that way. And
so you're saying this is something you actually had been doing routinely but had been unaware of it, and the ayahuasca made you aware of it?
Yes, exactly. And I can see, you know, when I work with people, I see how it's just this underlying thing that most people do. It's just in our culture, I think. So I vowed to not treat myself like that ever again. And it was very beautiful. It was a very beautiful turnaround, and it still took a while to fully incorporate that, of course. But that was also the beginning of the work that I do now as a self-love mentor, helping people to not judge themselves and criticize themselves and doubt themselves and shame themselves and stay in duality. You know, even people who have had beautiful awakenings, that underlying current is usually still there. I don't know if it's there more in women than in men. I know for sure it's there in women, the self-doubt and competing with other women, you know, trying to be different than we are. Very, very painful and very dualistic. Mm-hmm. So here again, there was another piece that got opened up to start just really treating myself with a lot more love. And that in itself is probably one of the most... that brings oneness to yourself when you don't do that division and, you know, judging and criticizing yourself. There's such duality in that, right? And if we're talking about non-dual teachings or awakenings, you know, where does that really fit in? So we need to deal with that.
Yeah.
And that's why also eventually I wrote the book called Imagine Being Kind to Yourself. It was like, imagine that, you know, being kind to yourself. It's like, what? But you know what was so interesting when I wrote that book, though? Because those are the days I went to satsang a lot. Was never talked about. Nobody talked about loving yourself. Like you said, you know, it's not real, you know, why deal with, you know. So I was in that environment, and there was this thing that arose in me. And because I saw my clients, they were just so hard on themselves. And I said, there's something missing here. You know, they would come in and say, you know, whatever teacher we were with, they would say, well, he or she says, you know, you just have to accept everything as it is. So they were trying to accept everything as it is. But I said, well, what about all the feelings you have? Are they not part of what is? And that's all that then developed and unraveled and became the book eventually, to actually learn how to be kind to yourself so you're not living in that duality. Yeah.
I think it's an important point, and maybe we'll be coming back to it, you know, several times during this interview. But there's different pieces to this puzzle, you know, and and the non-dual satsang teachers who are really sort of radical in that way have a piece, an important piece, and you know the sort of the more psychological, emotionally oriented people have a piece, and somehow, you know, it's all the pieces together make the whole puzzle. I think, and maybe not for everybody, but for most people, you know, and you just can't bypass or sidestep certain things and you know, Advaita them away.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Or meditate them. I'm going to meditate it away. Like, away to where? Where is it going to go if it's not included in the oneness? It's a funny concept, but that's part of the spirituality we grew up in.
Yeah, and you can always play devil's advocate, because meditation can clear away a great deal of stuff that you don't necessarily need to dwell on. It can actually just be cleared away, and you can clear away stuff you don't even know you had, and you don't even know it cleared. But next thing you know, you're feeling so much better and not behaving in a certain way anymore. But on the other hand, it doesn't seem that meditation in and of itself is able to resolve everything for most people, and usually other tools are necessary as well.
Seems to be, yeah.
Yeah, just realistically speaking.
Realistically speaking.
No, realistically speaking, it's
realistically.
like if we actually get real about it and see what kind of results people get, and see what's going on in the lives of some satsang teachers, actually, it kind of it reinforces the notion of a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah. I think it's important, like when you say there's all the pieces, right, and we need to put them all together, and you may just have to jump from one piece to the other, and I just need some therapy right now, so I'm just going to do that. Doesn't mean I'm not going to meditate. I'm going to stay grounded, because when you have the ground, things go much easier. So we have to find the ground of our being. We have to wake up to who we are. Otherwise, we'll just be out there, doing therapy and rearranging the deck chairs. Yeah. Absolutely. And there is a place for that too, I believe, to do that first. If there's too much trauma, if there's too much identification, if the grip is too tight, I don't know if you can just let it go and do this. So there might be some work that needs to be done before you can even start meditating and benefit from it. But again, we're all different. I don't see there's one recipe for all of us. We have to create our own recipe and use it.
Yeah. I was just reading something, and maybe it was in your book or some other thing it just came across in the last day or two, where somebody was saying that they couldn't sit still for 5 minutes to meditate. They just weren't wired that way. It was too difficult for them. And that could be partially due to the technique of meditation they're trying to do, but also some people just aren't able to sit easily, and there's other things they can do. Maybe 5 years from now, sitting will become naturally to them, but maybe right now it's really not the right thing for them.
Right, and are we supposed to all meditate? Is that the rule? I don't know what we all came here for. I'm finding out more and more what I came here for, but somebody else may have come down here to experience a whole different aspect of life, which does not include meditation. So why not allow that to unfold its own way too? Mm-hmm. On your show here, most people are very interested, of course, in the awakening aspect, because that's what you bring in here. Mm-hmm. So that is important here. And meditation is a big part of awakening, I think. I don't know how you can connect to that place if you're not taking the time to go there only and focus on that. Mm. So of course we want that here, but I think there is a lot more than that, and it's available to us.
Yeah, that analogy comes to mind of they say dig one deep well rather than digging 10 shallow wells, and then you'll hit water. But, you can twist that analogy a little bit to say, well, how about using 10 different tools to dig one deep well?
Yes, that's a great, yeah.
Maybe you want a shovel and a pickaxe and a jackhammer and, a bunch of different things.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There was another thing that just came to my mind, too, when you talked about something that I wrote this other article the other day or recently about, what are we really awake to? Mm-hmm. What are we, because it's such a funny concept. A few years ago, I ran into a friend who I know is not awake the way we talk about awake, and she says, I just woke up, and now I can see how I have lived my life with my partner, and she had woken up to some unconscious of sleep part, how she had lived her life, and she had woken up to that, and this is years ago, and it made me think for me, I always thought it was about the spiritual awakening, right? which is only part of it. Because look what we're waking up to today. We're waking up to eating healthier, how we treat each other, the government, the finances, with all the things going on in the world.
Environment.
The environment, all these things we're waking up to, eating is a big part of it. Do we eat animals that have been treated terribly and take that in, and instead of taking a stand for maybe creating a better world? We are waking up to that we may have a purpose in life. God forbid, right? In non-duality, you can't have a purpose, but I think we do, because that's part of it. I can't exclude anything really. I can just see that we are more and more waking up to things that we have been completely asleep to, and some of them are a little hard to wake up to and see what we have actually been participating in the world, but we didn't know because we were asleep. So there's a lot more to awakening than just to your true nature, although that is a huge and very important piece of it if you are actually drawn in that direction.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think that one can be profoundly awake to one's true nature and yet still have relative awakenings that need to happen. They can have blind spots. They can be misogynistic or insensitive or negligent or in other ways. And so it seems to me that awakening, maybe it has a foundation in true nature, but at the same time it's a multifaceted thing. And when people say, someone says, well, is so-and-so awake or so-and-so is awake, I say, yeah, I guess so, to a degree. They've had an awakening. I suspect there's other ways or other degrees to which they could awaken, but it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, what are they awake to? If you, for instance, that person is awake, I would ask, well, what are they awake to?
Yeah.
And what are they not awake to?
Yeah.
Because for me, it's more like, the awakeness, the more I spend time resting in and as that, it just kind of expands. And in the expansion, I start seeing things that I didn't see before, whether it's outside or inside. So it's an expansion of the light, of the awakeness, seeing itself in and as everything where it didn't see itself before.
Brings up an interesting analogy that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi used to say. He used to say that if you think of life as like a territory, and in the territory there are different things you could explore, diamond mines and silver mines and interesting things like that. But you could go and start going after those, but the problem is you don't own the territory. You need to first capture the fort that commands the territory, and then having captured the fort, then you can more safely and legitimately explore all these things and at your leisure. So maybe this is a good analogy for this idea of different kinds of awakenings. This sort of the true nature awakening would be the fort. And if you're just going after this little mine here or that little mine there without having captured that, you're a little bit on tenuous ground. But on the other hand, you could sort of capture the fort and then not bother to explore the territory and leave all kinds of other things undeveloped and be a real SOB who happens to be in tune with true nature or something.
Exactly. Yeah, there's plenty of those, I think. Yeah.
Interesting. Alrighty. So we referred to satsang teachers, and I noticed that you've engaged with several, Gangaji, Adyashanti. I don't know much about Joe Dispenza, and then Sat Sri. Did you find out about Sat Sri through Bat Gap, or did you already know about him?
I had a friend here in Felton, where I live, in the Santa Cruz Mountain, who had invited him to come and give a satsang. So she sent a little email out just to a few, small group of people that she knew, and it was right in town. So I went. And was
that in the last couple of years?
A year and a half ago. I think it was not too long after he'd been on your show. So I went to a retreat right after, which was absolutely wonderful. I do love going to retreats and, just steep in the silence. And Satya has a very strong transmission. So it really, I mean, it just helps expand more. That, you know, and in an expansion, I may see more here, I may see more there. That's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
And I just got back 2 months ago from 2 months in Tiruvannamalai with him in India.
I'll be darned.
And it was absolutely wonderful, you know, just to take out 2 months out of your life and only focus on the truth in a place where, you know, the truth is beaming, you know, the energy is so strong in Tiru. Have you been?
No, never have.
Oh, okay. It's just so, I've been there before. It's just so beautiful. So I just had 2 absolutely wonderful months of just, you know, a deepening inside, clearing out more stuff, expanding more. Just lovely. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Elaborate a little bit more on all these people that you've interacted with. Gangaji, Adyashanti, you know, Joe Dispenza. I don't know anything about him. Sat Shri. Just let's take 5-10 minutes and just talk about some of the tidbits that you've managed to.
Okay.
You know, how each one has their own flavor, perhaps, and how different. You know, it's like different flowers in the garden. They each have their oun aroma, and the bee goes from flower to flower. In fact, Mirabai Starr gave a nice talk one time that I saw called "Bees in the Garden," and it was about the sort of multiculturalism, or sort of, you know, picking up knowledge here and there, like a bee would go from flower to flower. So, and that's kind of what I do with this show. I mean, for me, I'm like a big bee, just every week sniffing a different flower. So anyway, talk about that a little bit, just about how your life has been going with these different teachers and what you've gleaned from different ones.
Yeah, you know, Gangaji was just short. There wasn't a lot that I went to. But Arya was for many years. I was very involved with his teachings, and I did a lot of retreats. I was also managing his retreats for a couple of years. So I basically was on almost every retreat he did. And I mean, I just have a deep, deep love for Arya. I was with him for so many years, and I really felt that I got much more grounded in the awakening and started, you know, realizing that this is actually who I am. And it was not just an experience that came and went. I started just grounding in it more. It's just lovely. Yeah. I will always feel a deep love for him, you know. I probably for all of them. Well, you met Arya.
Sure.
So you knew him, yeah. And who was the other one?
Oh, you mentioned... well, you've talked about Sat Shri a little bit. You could elaborate more on his thing. You've also mentioned Hakomi and Diksha, which is the Oneness University thing.
Yeah. I have been a bee just going all over the world, nibbling. And it's really, I really like that. It's just, because here's the thing, I just follow. It moves me. This deeper place in me moves me. And I've just learned to trust that. So with, the Oneness University, that was also, suddenly was just this movement inside, just, I'm going. And sometimes it surprises me when there's a strong movement to do something, but I just do it. So I did that years ago, and I had weekly Diksha at my house with a group of people who came every week. And I thought it was wonderful. I felt there was a big chunk of Pranila that disappeared during that time. And then, who was the other one? Oh, well, I'll tell you about Sat Shri. And again, with Sat Shri, it was so amazing. The India trip that I went on, I knew it was happening. There was nothing in me that wanted to go. It hadn't even been as a thought, you know, it's just a possibility. And then I talked to a friend who was going to go, and I said, oh, that's so great. I'm so happy for you. And then I hung up the phone, and then this energy starts moving in me. It's like, okay, let me sit down and listen, right? So I sat down, and I was like, oh my God, to go to India for 2 months and just leave everything behind, you know, and then all the attachments came up. What about my cat? What about my mom? You know, she's in Denmark, but she's 91. What about my clients? What about my students? What about my garden? You know, all this attachment. And I just saw it all rising. And I was just looking at it. And I was like, really, Pranila? Really? Is that more important? And then it all just kind of dropped. And then I got up for my meditation, and I knew I was going to India. That's kind of how things happen for me. It's never really a choice. It's more like the choice is made for me. Yeah. So, yeah, there was, I mean, he has such a strong transmission that it's really, there's really a nice expansion and burning that happens there. And that's kind of what I am more moved to now to instead of learning more, it's like, nah, let's just, steep in it and let it do its thing.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, you're a little bit footloose and fancy-free. You don't have a husband or children or anything. I mean, it's one thing to have cats and a garden, but it's another thing if you had a family. It might be a little harder to just
Absolutely.
take off. And so, in deference to those who are in a more, encumbered situation, if we want to use that word, they shouldn't feel guilty about not being able to bop around the world.
But it's there's something about it, because when the movement comes, it will do what needs to happen for you to get there or to do it. So, to compare with somebody, it's not, that's neither here nor there.
It's your movement, your circumstances, your life.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we all have that. And this movement isn't every one of us. It's learning to tune into it enough that we can trust it and then move with it, instead of using the mind to block or to go back and not do it, right? To let fear stop us. So it's learning more and more just to trust that and go free as a bird, of course, and just fly with it. And sometimes it may mean that you need to leave something behind or change things, because that's how it works, right? When you allow the divine to take over your life, things are going to fall away, things are going to change, and that can be scary. I mean, I left Denmark behind. I left everything behind,
Yeah.
So.
And I've done a lot of that too. I mean, just dropping everything on a moment's notice and going around the world. But on the other hand, you have different phases of life, and different people have different dharmas, And I think it's important to understand that one can evolve most effectively within one's dharma. There's even a verse in the Gita which says this. It says, though lesser in merit, one's own dharma is better than another. And the dharma of another brings danger. So you have to sort of be true to yourself and true to your circumstances.
I usually use the metaphor of we need to surf our own wave and not try and get on somebody else's wave, because we're going to fall off. But when you surf your own wave, it's going to take you home.
Right.
We don't know how, but it's going to take you home, and you're going to have a lot of experiences on the way that may be good, maybe hard. We don't know. But it's finding that, the self-love thing that I use, it's helped me to just come home, to love everything, so I can fully trust the deeper dharma, or that thing that lives as us, to come home to that. And then it is really like you're just surfing, and then you learn to surf with it, and you learn to, left, right, yes, no, right?
Yeah.
And it is a flow. It really is a flow, and you need to learn to flow with it. And that's a skill that I didn't learn that overnight. I'm still learning. I'm learning every day.
Yeah. And you watch a really good surfer, and they make it look so easy, because they're not fighting the wave or the force of gravity or anything else. They're just sort of, doing it in the most efficient, effortless way possible, and that's the best way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you call yourself a self-love mystic, and I guess you've sort of touched upon what that means, but is there anything, and mentor, self-love mystic and mentor, you like to support your clients in bridging the gap between who they truly are and who they think they are or should be. You want to just riff on that a little bit more?
Well, the mystic and mentor, I kind of like the flow.
Yeah.
But there is truth to, like, when you live in and as that self-love, I feel I'm in the mystery, because what is the mystery? That's when you really don't know, right? The mystery is outside the known. And the known is trying to, make things look a certain way or go a certain way. But when I just am in this flow of loving myself, I really don't know where I'm going from moment to moment. I may have a sense like, oh, we're going to the right, and oh, we turn to the left. But it feels like I'm in that mystery, because I don't know. And, it can be scary to live in the not knowing in the beginning. So there is also a lot of love and compassion to just learn to surf, learn to find out well, what does this mean? What does that mean? Does that mean I have to go right when I feel that movement? So it's getting to know how to live in the mystery. And then the mentoring part is, I'm maybe the surf teacher who is
Yeah.
showing them how to do that. And it's all done through allowing and allowing and allowing everything that comes up, everything. There's a space for everything that we are. And if we can just include it and listen to it, learn from it, love it. And then sometimes it means, okay, I need to let this go, or I just need to go and talk to that person, or I need to leave that job, or I need to, stand up for myself more, whatever it is. See, again, I'm really I'm in the human, I'm in the body. I'm not out there. I'm in here. That's where my Dharma is. It's in the body. And so that's how everything goes, because I cannot allow division in oneness. It's just like, I say I allow everything. If there is division, we allow the experience of division. Everything is allowed to be felt and experienced. In the allowing, things always change. Always, always, always. There's always like, oh, and then there's more expansion, there's more understanding, there's more vision, there's more clarity. But when we are resisting, right? So it's a lot of it is between resisting what is and allowing what is, no matter what it is. And the more we allow, I feel I'm just in the ocean of allowing, where, every little fish, every shark, every undercurrent, every tsunami, everything is allowed, because the ocean does not exclude anything. And in that, I feel I am that ocean of allowing, and then change can happen, for sure.
Yeah, and also saying no is allowed. Like, if you had that more clear back when that guy, moved into your house, you were sort of, everything is allowing, but not my saying no, that's not allowed. So,
Exactly.
So he took advantage of you.
Yeah. And how often do we not allow a feeling of no to be spoken because we want to fit in, right?
Yeah.
And I actually think when you're in spiritual circles, there is a tendency to needing to be spiritually correct or something. And it's such nonsense.
Like, give us an example.
You might appear more loving than you are, or if you're angry, you suppress it, or if everybody agrees to a certain thing, like, and then you feel it's different, you don't want to say it because it's not spiritually correct or something. There's a lot of that, and I think I'm a little bit of a rebel in that way. And I had to maybe tone that down a little bit too, so it's not coming from a rebel place, but just from like, it's just not my truth. But I kind of had to fight my way to get to that place where I can just say it from a place like, I just can't feel it, or it's not my truth. Even if everybody else, maybe in a non-dual circle where everybody says, oh, self-love is not real because there's nobody to love. I had some of that in the beginning, where I'll just share this, because when I had published my book, which I should be happy and grateful for, which I was, but I had a place of shame. I felt a little ashamed that I wrote such an unspiritual book. This is 10 years ago, right?
This is the one, Imagine Being Kind to Yourself, that one?
Yes. Yeah.
Didn't seem unspiritual to me. I was reading it.
Well, back then, nobody talked about that.
Oh, I see.
Not in satsang circles, that was not what we were doing there.
It was too psychological or emotional or personal.
Yes, exactly, yeah. So, but I'm over that.
Yeah.
and I see it actually almost everywhere. In a lot of people are becoming coaches, and a lot of teachers who are out there, spiritual teachers who have different flavors than satsang. I see it, almost everybody talks about how important self-love is, because that is the vision that we have overlooked.
Yeah. And if you talk to somebody like Mariana Kaplan, for instance, who is a psychologist and who actually consults with a lot of spiritual teachers, she'll tell you that, without naming names, she'll tell you that, it's quite remarkable or almost shocking how many well-known and maybe not so well-known spiritual teachers have all kinds of issues that they're dealing with in their private lives, and of course some of that stuff ends up going public too and creating a big disruption. But you know, as I said earlier, you just can't Advaita away certain things. They need to somehow be dealt with and resolved.
Yep. That's right. And I think it's very common. I mean, we've heard so many examples of the spiritual male teachers from the past, the big ones, you know, how they had sexual interaction with younger boys. And so there is definitely, there is a blind spot there.
Yeah.
And like when we talked about shame, I think these people have shame around it, because if they weren't ashamed of it, why would they hide it?
Yeah. This actually brings up a point. I'm glad you mentioned that. At the Science of Non-Duality Conference in October, I'm going to give a talk on the ethics of enlightenment. Not that I'm some great paragon of morality, or that I have some profound wisdom or insight into this, but it's just such a troubling and common issue that things happen with spiritual teachers that end up really shaking up their sanghas, or disillusioning people from spirituality altogether. And people scratch their heads after, what is going on? Why is it that these incidences are so common? And is there actually a correlation between spiritual awakening and ethical behavior? And some people actually argue that there isn't. Some say it's behavior is all just conditioning and genetics, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with your state of consciousness. And I tend to disagree with them and say that there should be a correlation, and if it doesn't, if there's a lot of problems in that kind of area, that there's something has not been integrated, something has not been resolved. So we've talked about this a bit in this conversation, but let's dwell on it a bit more. Maybe in light of what I just said, maybe you could say some things.
Well, I've had a close encounter of that in a relationship I was in quite a few years ago now. So I don't want to go into a lot of...
With a spiritual teacher, or with somebody?
Not a teacher, but somebody who definitely claimed that he was enlightened, awake, or whatever. And I don't really doubt that he'd gone through that experience, but there was just a lot that had never been dealt with.
Yeah.
And boy, does that come out in an intimate relationship. Like, wow. Yeah. So, and, I have been, I know a lot of spiritual teachers, some more close than others, but I have seen and heard things that I go like, really? It doesn't match, But then again, it doesn't match my my view or my idea about how enlightenment is supposed to look, right?
How enlightenment is supposed to look?
Yeah, I mean, in my eyes...
What is your view? How should it look?
Well, again, I can only speak how I want it to look for me because of the movement inside of me, and that is I want to include everything. Right. I want to show up in and as love, and bring that to where it's needed. Let's say bring light to where there is a lack of light, or bring love when people are, not feeling loved. So it's bringing that out. And again, it's because that is how it moves here in me. I don't know if that's how it is supposed to look, but if I compare with here, then that it certainly doesn't match certain things I've seen over there. But in my experience, it certainly is true that the more I sink in, the more peace, the more presence. I think presence is my strongest flavor of the expression. I just, I just feel I'm oozing that presence all the time. Some other people, it may be stillness or, love, but I feel it comes out the more I clear the windows.
Yeah.
The windshield, the more it can just shine out. And when I know the qualities of this place, when I go inside, I do not encounter shame or anger or selfishness, not in the core of who I am. I can certainly find that as some dirt on the windshield. So I want to clean that. Again, the movement here is, as you have probably heard in this interview, like I'm all about embodiment and clearing up what is not love, what is not presence, what is not peace, that's how it is for me. So I don't know if it's like that for others. It doesn't sound like it is, but maybe there are some blind spots that they don't even know about. Maybe they have done the bypass, which has been used by many as a way to avoid dealing with this stuff, because it's not always fun to deal with. I don't like dealing when it's really heavy-duty stuff. But it feels good when I do, because as soon as you go into that place that you don't want, that you're ashamed of or afraid of or whatever, when you go in there without resistance, you know, it opens up. And here I am again, right? Oh, here I am again. So it's also a way of discovering yourself in everything that you thought was not you. So there is a sweetness to it also.
Nice. So I'm hesitant to use the word enlightenment myself because it has such a static, superlative connotation, you know. But if I were to use it, you know, then I would really want to apply it to someone who exudes the qualities of saintliness, really. I mean, not only sort of awake in terms of their inner consciousness, but that consciousness has so permeated every facet of their personality and behavior that, you know, they're just utterly compassionate and loving and, you know, ethically sound and so on and so forth. I mean, do you sort of hold that ideal also, or what?
I think I do. Yeah, I like the way you describe it.
Yeah.
And can you think of somebody that you see like that?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to necessarily name present characters. I can think of plenty who haven't lived up to that ideal. You know, there's so many situations like the one you alluded to a little bit ago about some famous teacher messing with young boys. You know, some of the historical figures like Jesus and Buddha and people like that, and you know, Ramana seems to be up there. Which is not to say that, you know, I mean, Jesus got angry and turned over the money changers' tables in the temple and, you know, did this and that. But so it's not like they would necessarily fit some idyllic conception of, you know, nicey, goody all the time.
Yeah.
There could be all kinds of a range of emotions. But I guess if I could find a bottom line, it would be not harming people in any way. You know, if he's angry, it's for their good. But I can think of many situations where teachers have been harmful to the lives of others through their misbehavior, and that I can't associate with enlightenment.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But if I think of current, I mean, there's a few people I would think of, maybe current ones who are like Amaji. I see you have her picture behind. I mean, when I've been to her, it's just coming into the room, it just exudes that love and passion.
And she has her critics, and, you know, she's been accused of getting real angry and, you know, even hitting people with a stick and things like that, which of course the old Zen masters used to do. So I don't want to just pretend that kind of stuff doesn't happen, but I always get the sense with her that there really is sort of the highest ideal in mind in terms of how she deals with people, even if it's being a you know, disciplinarian or something.
Yeah, but then again, is there something wrong about being angry sometimes? Because anger is an energy that.
Yeah, I'm not saying there is. I mean, the example of Jesus, for instance, getting angry. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. I mean, if I look at myself, I can get angry, but it's usually very short-lived. For instance, I had to deal with some phone companies not too long ago. You know? Oh my God. And I think I spent about 15 hours total to change and whatever I need to do. And it was just, I got so angry because I got cut off, and, you know, there's this, I got so angry, but it was very short-lived. It was like, boom, you know, and then a moment later it was gone. So I just noticed, like, you know, that happened. This is frustrating, and there's a reaction to that. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you know, you're talking on the phone with somebody, and you're tending to get angry, but that can also be an opportunity to learn patience and tolerance, because you're talking to some poor character who's making $12 an hour, and they're doing their best, you know, and there's no point in getting angry at them. It just makes their job miserable.
Well, I usually say, you know, I know I'm angry. I'm not angry at you. I know it's not your fault, but I'm angry, you know. So I kind of do that. But I have noticed that, like you say, it's actually getting less when these things happen. Yeah. It's just like, oh, well, whatever, you know. So it's a lessening, because I don't want to be angry.
Yeah.
But sometimes there is an anger that just comes out for a moment like that, and then and it's nothing big. But I think the lights start shining through more and more, and then there isn't so much room for these other things.
Yeah. Speaking of Amma, she uses the analogy of anger being like a knife that doesn't have a handle and it's sharp on both ends. So you can wound a person with it, but you're wounding yourself at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Well, perfection. I'm not perfect.
Yeah. Well, it's a high bar too.
Yeah, I know.
A question came in from Frank in Norway. Frank asks a question about traumas. He said, it's a little bit long, take me 30 seconds to read. Traumas come in all sizes, and we all experience some, especially when we're young. We normally get through them and leave them behind, believing we are done with them, but there are very often remnants that we are not aware of, manifesting as anxiety or depression we don't understand the source of. The traumas are not forgotten, we just don't make the connection anymore. They are hiding in plain sight. I believe it's a widespread problem. How do you suggest we deal with it?
Well, I absolutely agree. I think even though the event is over, the impact still lives in us. It lives in our cells. Because the work I do as a Hakomi practitioner, which is all about the body. So I know the body tells us what's going on. It tells us why it has anxiety. And so instead of taking some medications, unless you really need it if it's that bad, but take some time to breathe into that place. Let's say you have anxiety in your chest, put your hands on your chest, breathe in consciously into the chest. And I usually say, do it with a kind hello. Instead of like, go away, we usually want to get rid of these painful feelings and we resist them. So for me, it's very much about making a Yui. And instead of trying to get rid of them, move right into there with a kindness, with a willingness to learn what this anxiety is so anxious about. And then when you do that, you can be sure it's going to start talking to you. There might be tears, there might be something, there's going to be something coming up. And then at least there is an opportunity to liberate it, or to love it, or to give it what it needs. Hold its hand, walk through that landscape with love. And I mean, I have not been able to do all that on my own. I had a lot of Hakomi therapy and Hakomi supervision for years when I learned this. And we talked about Hakomi earlier. I mean, that's been my magic bullet for years, because it really helped me to walk through the body and move into areas that I didn't know how to do that on my own. But one first step is to make space, allow the feeling of this anxiety or whatever trauma this person is talking about, or maybe it's just conceptual, but just make some space for it. And then breathe into it with kindness, and then see what happens. How does that place respond to somebody who cares instead of somebody who just wants to get rid of it or bypass it? It's like, well, what is this anxiety so scared about? There might be shame, there might be fear of not being good enough, that nobody cares about me, all the things that happen. And then you start integrating and talking to it and giving it what it needs. So I'm very much for just, filling up with love. Yeah. Because that's really all it needs. That's all we want at the bottom, is at the core. We want love.
Well, I hope that helps, Frank. And if you have a follow-up question, feel free to submit it. I want to add an addendum to something I just said about Amma, and that is that, it's sort of like she's not going to deal with a person in a strict way and maybe be angry and stuff unless they've really submitted themselves to a close relationship, a close discipleship. I remember one time when early on, when my wife and I first started seeing her, we were in some gathering of fairly close people because we were giving somebody a ride home that was in her circle, and so she was coming in there where they were having dinner, and she kind of stormed into the room, and she was really upset about something, and everybody was like, ugh. And then and then she saw us sitting there, my wife and I, and she like, whew, just settle down. Okay, I'm not going to behave that way in front of these people. They're new. They didn't sign up for this. You know, we'll deal with these other people later.
Yeah. Well, it's that Zen sort, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing to have if you know how to use it.
And if you're qualified.
Yes, absolutely. Because you can cut through things. And sometimes I think that's very necessary. If somebody is completely lost in something, just not smacking, but maybe clapping your hands or something where it's like, they come out of a trance and it's like, oh, where was I? So I think there's absolute value in it. But yeah, it has to be done in a skilled manner, for sure.
I think there are examples of unqualified people trying to behave that way, having heard that gurus behave that way, who do a lot of damage. For instance, Andrew Cohen, whom I'll name since his whole thing has gone public, and he's been consciously expressing contrition for the way he behaved for so many years, just blasting people with anger and abusing them and so on, and really not in a place from which he could do that with complete integrity and wisdom, and thereby hurting a lot of people. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And that just tells me about this man, that he's done a bypass. There is some unresolved stuff in him that even makes him want to do that.
Yeah.
Like there's a power thing or whatever, and these things always lead back to trauma where somebody overpowered him probably, and that's the only way he knew, whatever. And then you can do the bypass to get rid of it all, but here it is.
Yeah, he's been trying to resolve it recently. Even has been doing ayahuasca trips and stuff to work through it.
Okay.
Okay, so there was a nice section from your book where I started extracting little quotes because I like this theme you were bringing up. You say, there's a new dream that wants to be dreamed, and it is beginning to manifest in the many changes that are already happening in the world. It looks like we're at a point in history where two dreams are meeting. The old one is on the way out, and the new one is on the way in. Right where the two currents meet, there's a lot of turmoil. If you fight it and hang on to the old dream, you will go under with that dissipating current, not because you are bad, but simply because you're holding on to a current that has ended and is going under. So I find that interesting. I'm definitely an observer of the world situation, and always trying to think about what's really happening underneath the latest headline, and what sort of, because I do feel that there's a big shift taking place in society and in the world, and that we'd be quite surprised to see where the world will be 50 years from now if things go in a positive direction, which I don't know if that's a done deal, but it's interesting to consider what the undercurrents may be that are if it's true that consciousness is awakening and that we're moving into a more enlightened society, then that trend, or that there's definitely that undercurrent of consciousness getting enlivened must be having a major impact on world events, even though it may not be obvious to the ordinary observer. So what do you have to say about all that?
First, I'm going to say, wow, did I write that?
You did, actually, yeah.
That's how it often when I write, I go, oh, wow, where did that come from? But it is true, because it is my experience that there is this new energy arising. I call it the new paradigm. Mm-hmm. I say it lives in our hearts. I have yet to meet anybody who is not on some kind of awakening path, who does not have some kind of vision of what is possible, that inspires them, but they don't know what to do with it. And that's been my own process again, right? It all comes back to how we live that, because there's this thing that's been pushing me to move forward more and get out there more. And it's about, the self-love is a big piece of the energy that moves here, as well as creating community. And I'm doing a lot to create community too. Community gardens. I have, grow a lot of my food and have people gotten involved in that. I have a meetup group called Young Women Empowerment Circle, because I see this new energy. I sense that in, my clients or the women who come to my groups. there is this new energy living in them, and they don't know what to do with it, because most people in the world are not attuned to that yet, or they can't really help them because they haven't gotten in touch with their own. I'm very much in touch with my own, and it actually happened years ago where I saw this so clearly, where I've been watching a DVD from a friend called From Freedom to Fascism. And at the same time, I was reading the books. I don't know if you read the books, the Ringing Cedar series.
You referred to them, and I'm aware of them, but I've never actually sat down and read them.
Okay, I think I may have written that even in my book, where she talked about this, that there is kind of a hierarchy that's controlling the world, and it's even controlling how we dream or what we want. I can't remember, it's years ago, but it sparked something in me just to see that DVD as well as reading those books. I was sitting there and I was just this, I'm here to help people get back in touch with the dream that lives in their heart. It was one of those, moments. And that's when I started, going out there more and do something. So that was mine. That was what lived in here. You have yours by the work that you do here, right? There is something you want to bring, this awakening awareness to the world.
Right.
I think we all have something. For me, it's very much also about permaculture and community living and growing our own food. There's many, many different things that people are experiencing, and I love helping them get in touch with that, because that inspires me, right? That's part of my dream. So if I can help you get in touch with your dream, that's part of my dream, right? Because that's what I love to do. And I see it so much. I think the issue is that people don't really know what to do with it. And what happens too, again, referring back to myself, I've had to move through a lot of fear to go out there again and be seen. And I've had some past life regression sessions where I could see why I'm so afraid. I've been disemboweled and burned and, all these things, like, yikes, do I really want to do that again? So I've had a lot of fear of living this more publicly. So when I was invited onto your show, it brought up that fear again. So I had to just, be with that and see, it really is time, because this is a message. It's not my message. It's part of that new wave that wants to come out. And I'm not going to go back on the old wave of fear, trying to hold things together and do things the way that don't resonate with me. So that's what I see. And I think there's a big need to help people get in touch with that and find the courage to live that, because Rick, it's so new, it's so different. It's so different. Like, for me to call myself a self-love mystic and mentor, there's no school for that. You don't go, you just create out of nothing. You create out of your heart. And when there's nobody around you saying, yeah, go on, you go like, oh no, this is too weird. I better go back to my regular job and at least I can pay my bills or something. But this thing is pushing you. No, you need to be out there. You need to teach people this thing, or you need to build this new green building thing. And I'm really excited about this because I can feel it. This energy is so rich and exciting. And I want to do my part to really bring it out. And it's happening. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of people who are stepping out, doing the absolute unusual, and doing, stepping out and being different.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah.
There's an old Bengali saying, which is, if no one comes on your call, then go ahead alone. And but these days, nobody's alone, because, like, as you say, there's just such a groundswell of interest in this sort of thing, and maybe some people feel alone because they haven't connected with the others. Yeah. But it's getting easier and easier to connect.
Yeah, and that's why community, I think, is so essential, because it's part of the new energy. The new paradigm is living more in community. It doesn't mean we live 10 people in one house, But it means we live in a way where we know each other, we support each other, maybe we eat together sometimes. There's some kind of where we feel the support from each other so that we are not alone anymore. Being alone is part of the old paradigm in that way. It's not that we can't be on our own, but there is this new energy, and man, it's exciting. And there's a word that comes to my mind, because in a way we're being weird. We are standing out as weird. And I heard years ago that the word weird comes from a English root or something spelled W-Y-R-D, and it means what is meant to be or fate. And that was, again, that's exciting, right? It's like, oh, so when I'm weird, it just means I'm not part of the gray mass. I'm standing out doing what I came here for. I'm living my purpose. Yeah. So be weird. In Santa Cruz, we have stickers here that says something. It's okay to be weird or something. There's something about being weird in Santa Cruz that's
weird is the new normal or something.
That's right. Yeah.
There's another nice little tidbit I picked up from your book. Said, and this is just a bumper sticker you were quoting. I've seen this one too. It says, "If you're not in awe, you're not paying attention."
Right. Yeah. There's the opposite one that says, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention, right? Have you seen that one?
I guess that's the standard one, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is whatever we are focusing on, right? If you're focusing on the new unfolding and your consciousness, you will be in awe. But if you're focusing on the old way out, you might get a little angry. Yeah. Maybe there's a place for both, but I kind of have the feeling that if the scales would completely fall from our eyes and we were to see the world as deeply as it can possibly be seen, our jaws would be hanging open. We would definitely be in awe. Yeah. Agree.
Nice. Alrighty. So divinefeminineflow.com is your website. And what would people find if they go there?
Well, there is a little free book they can get called 5 Steps to Dive into the Divine Feminine Flow. That's my little introduction to the work. There's a lot of old radio shows. I used to have a radio show.
Yeah, I listened to 5 or 10 of those
in
the last week. They're good. Yeah.
Thank you. So they can listen to a lot of that for free. There's some smaller books.
Women Standing for Love, right?
Women Standing, that was something I started also. That's, again, it's like, if we as women stand for love and do it together, we get our spine back. We can stand up. And when you stand for love, you're actually saying no to what is not love, right? Or if you can't do anything about it, you can at least focus on what you want. So that's part of the new paradigm. You just start creating a new world. A friend of mine once said, it's like, if you have to put new electric wire in your house, you just put a new one. You don't try and fix the old one, right? You just put the new one in. So that's what we're doing here. We just start creating. You start creating community gardens. You start creating things. And then eventually when the old does collapse, which I'm assuming it will, I can't see how it's sustainable, then there is, there is something else that can start taking over and growing. So that's why Women Standing for Love, I felt that was a good thing. It's never really took off, but it was one of those downloads, and I just went for it. Yeah.
Great.
And then I have one called Allow Yourself to Be You. It's just little booklets you can download, and you have my regular book, Imagine Being Kind to Yourself. I'm going to offer in a week or two. I'm going to do a 6-week class called, it's not on my website, called The Global Impact of Self-Love. And so it will be 6-week class, how to live that, how to live the love, and how to actually, you will make an impact in the world if you're really being yourself. Because when you're being yourself, you are a different frequency. And that in itself, I'm sure you know, that already changes the world by us lifting our own frequency. So that's why self-love helps you live your deeper dharma, your truth. There you're already making a difference. And then if there's something else from there that wants to go out and express itself in a certain way, go for it.
But if it's not on your website, how can people sign up for it?
Oh, that's a good question. They, if they, if you're on my email list, or I send a newsletter out, so make sure you sign up. You'll get the free booklet, and if you don't like it, you can always opt out at any time. But if you're on my newsletter list, you'll get probably next week. I might send out
Okay.
the information how to get on there. Yeah.
So they should sign up for your newsletter if they want that. And then you mentioned you do individual consultations, presumably over Skype and stuff, right?
Skype, in person if you live in Santa Cruz. But yeah, I do Skype sessions.
Okay. Great.
And they can read all about that on my website, how to sign up for that.
Right. Good. Well, thanks. This has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, likewise. It was fun. It wasn't so scary.
No, we're not into disemboweling people on Batgap or burning them at the stake or anything like that. That's so Middle Ages, you know.
I know. I appreciate that. Oh, yeah.
Which is actually a kind of a good point, because we live in an age where something like this higher consciousness thing can really blossom without people being persecuted for stepping. I mean, there was a time when, women were burned at the stake for being herbalists and, basic stuff like that. That's common nowadays. So,
I mean, it's not so strange that we still have that fear in our, in our cells.
Yeah,
it's still in there.
Been through it.
Absolutely. So I really, again, be kind to yourself. If you're one of those people who has some fear around that, be really kind to yourself and take the time for that cellular memory to be released.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The world is growing. I think it's evolving. I mean, there was this Italian monk named Giorgio Bruno who was burned at the stake for suggesting that the stars might actually be suns like our own, and that there might actually be other civilizations living around those stars. And he really had some kind of mystical insight into this, and he wouldn't let it go, and the church killed him for it.
Yeah.
So we live in a better time, I think.
I think we do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a bit of a morbid note to end on, but I think we've covered a lot here, and I think people will enjoy having heard from you, and many people will be getting in touch.
Great. Well, I really appreciate it. Really. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everybody listening in, and it's been wonderful. I've enjoyed myself.
Good. Me too. Let me just make a couple of quick wrap-up points. So I've been speaking with Pernilla Little-Rose, and this is an ongoing series of interviews. Next week will be Jeannie Zandi. Week after that, Suzanne Giesman, who's a repeat. The week after that, Lakota John, who will be my first Native American guest on the show. We'll be talking about Native American spirituality. And of course, you may be listening to this 2 years from now, and all these things will already have passed, but there'll be new ones. So thanks for listening or watching. And if you'd like to support the show, there's a donate button on every page. If you'd like to be notified of new interviews or check out previous ones, go to batgap.com, BATGAP, and just check out the menus. It's all pretty obvious and not too complicated. There's also an audio podcast of the show if you like to listen to this sort of thing while you're commuting. So thanks, and thank you again, Pernilla, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.